In the late 1970s, EMI and Ampex both went around reverse engineering magnetophone tape recorders caught after World War II. This is the British version, the BTR1. You can see it has the reverse head block tape head, which is found only on a very few British machines. The machines ran at 30 inches a second, or just about, and they were monophonic. Quite quickly, Ampex made stereo tape recorders, the first being the 200, followed by the 200A, with the heads then swapped the right way around, or the more common way of oxide in. And this is the 300, which has the two VU meters on the top. This doesn't necessarily make this a stereo tape recorder, they were actually quite rare. This one would have been used mainly for data collection. The difference between an analog and a data machine is that the data machines do not have any equalization circuitry and don't have any input transformer. This particular machine is a data machine. Levers-rich tape recorders shortly followed the EMI recorders, and this machine here was one of the early stereo versions. That's thought to be that the reason they had stereo machines not was to record stereo sound, but to use them as a basic form of multi-track, so music could be on one side, vocals could be the other. I'm not 100% sure if that's true, but it would make sense because even at this time when this stereo machine came out, most recordings were monophonic. EMI produced the BTR2, which is the upgrade from the BTR1, from around about 1952 to 1960. These machines were still monophonic, and by the 60s stereo had started to become available. Introducing in 1961 the EMI BTR3/2. BTR3 being the Model 3, 2 for how many tracks? These machines were supposed to be designed to go up to 4 tracks, although that never happened. However, this isn't a BTR3. It certainly has the BTR3 front tape deck, but it doesn't have the BTR3 electronics. In fact, the electronics from this machine are almost identical to a BTR2. And though it shares many similarities with the BTR2, the main wiring loom is different. So what we have here is a bit of a Frankenstein. It's a BTR2 tape deck, it has a BTR3 front panel, and it has other wiring loom differences which don't exist in any kind of manual. So could it possibly be that somebody got hold of a couple of machines and built their own? Well, that is most probable. However, there's more to the story. On the inside of the machine here we have the words BTR2/3, serial number 18. This is handwritten, however this is how a lot of the BTR2 machines had the serial numbers put on the front panels, and I do believe that is possibly done in the factory. Now EMI, as I found out later on, were a little bit slow to the stereo race. They did at the point of the machine have stereo machines called the BTR3. The BTR2s, however, they had plenty of these machines, and they were all in the duplication rooms. And it's thought that that's where this machine came from. After speaking with one of the engineers who was involved with the modification of the BTR2 to the BTR2-3, I discovered that these machines had the audio replay electronics removed. The machines wouldn't have a replay head, and they'd have 2 power supplies and 2 record amplifiers. Then mounted on a separate trolley, for consistency reasons, a replay head and replay amplifiers were set up on the machine to make sure the machine was in the right recording levels and producing the right kind of recording quality that they wanted. So this still is a bit of an oddball because this machine has replay electronics. Inside here we can see a top left record amplifier, bottom left power supply. You can see at the bottom here the right hand channel record amplifier, the replay power supply, and then 2 Red 18 replay modules. Now these were an upgrade brought out in 1957 to replace the original replay amplifiers of the BTR2, which apparently didn't cope well with headroom. So I'm wondering whether or not this is either a factory built machine or something somebody built in their spare time. It's still a little bit unclear, but I do believe that this was built in the factory. What I do know is that these meters shouldn't be on here. You can hear the amps popping in live there. We should have a test rotary control here, if this was a BTR3, and the test meter here. You can just see down the bottom corner there of the machine that the test meter is now located underneath the machine itself, inside the electronics there. However, the rotary test select switch and the meter wouldn't really work with the BTR2 electronics, because the BTR3's test circuits are mounted on the front panel. The BTR2 test circuits are mounted on the individual amps. You select which amp you want to monitor from the replay amplifier, and then you have rotary controls on each amp. So it would render those redundant. Now the original studio I got this machine from said that originally the machine had some older style, different style meters in them, and that meter had a driver circuit on it which actually had an IC. So obviously that's not period, but somebody added VU meters to them. There's obviously two big holes there, and he decided he wanted it to look a little bit more original, and he found a couple of MIP meters, which are the ones found on the standard BTR2. Now I had to do a bit of work to get this machine up and running again. The original panel, all the wires have been cut off it, which might suggest that it wasn't originally on this machine. Quite probable. So I've redone all the wiring loom down here, and I've tried to keep it the same kind of braiding as before. I had to replace the front panel here. There's a couple of wires that were broken off inside it, but generally I got the machine back up and running again. Now EMI had their own stereo heads by this point for the BTR3, but in this machine we can see much later style butterfly heads. This is obviously not how the machine was intended, and it looks like as if possibly this machine was upgraded possibly in the 70s. So I started to do a bit of research on the machine, and I managed to get hold of one of the engineers who was involved with the development of it. He mentioned that in the early 60s EMI had started to fall behind on the technology, and stereo tapes were becoming readily available, but they didn't really have a stereo machine per se. They had the BTR3, but only a few of them. These were mainly used only in the studios. So for the tape manufacturing of records and reels of tape, which were called tape records back in the day, they needed a solution to be able to record on stereo tapes. The solution was to convert their mono machines into stereo machines. They later on discovered that this had problems where the tape path, which was fine for mono tape using the full width of the tape, wasn't very good for stereo tape. So modifications to guides was also made. The bigger problem was being able to house the electronics within one machine. For each replay unit it needed one power supply, and for each record amplifier it needed its own power supply. So on the main slave recorders, they decided the machines didn't need to be able to replay, they only needed to record the tape. So they removed the replay electronics and replaced them with a second set of record and power supply amplifiers. This machine, however, has both sets of electronics. This is because the red amplifiers are wired slightly different to the standard amplifier and can run off one power supply. The power supply for the record amplifiers powers one unit powers 2 lots of HT. There is a second power supply in the back of this machine which powers the heaters of the KT66s and the rest of the valves. So it's unlikely that this machine was used as a slave recorder. There are 3 other machines involved in the chain. One machine is the replay machine for replaying the tape to the slave machines, but that wouldn't need record electronics. One would be the master machine replaying the master tape to a dub down machine. That one certainly wouldn't want electronics because you wouldn't want to damage the master. But then there's a machine in the middle, the master dub machine, which would be able to record the tape and be able to replay the tape of the dub copy of the master record tape. So I have a feeling that this was possibly a master dub machine. That still doesn't explain why it has a BTR2 front panel. I have a feeling, because of the panel not having any wiring to it, that this was added at a later date. I suspect that this machine probably would have had a standard BTR2 front panel. But the problem with the front BTR2 panel is the kind of wiring involved. This BBC style BTR2 front panel shows that you've got the main meter in the middle and you've got a meter to the left, the test meter, which is found on the inside of the recorder now. You've also got the main function controls, and to the left and right of it you've got an A/B test switch and a monitor level switch test. You've also got a large recording level, and then you've got your spool and pre-fader for the input and output. The BTR2 doesn't have that. In fact, the standard BTR2 doesn't have the 2 chrome switches that we can see. These 2 chrome switches here are for monitoring the input and the output signals going to and from the recorder. Looking at the way that they've been mounted from the back, this is another modification. Something I completely missed when I first looked at this machine was what looked like 2 screws. In fact, they're not. These are actually record level settings. Now they're obviously set in a way so that you can't adjust them by accident, and they've got no scale on them. These are not like the normal record levels, which would give you, if we looked at another machine, gives you from minus 40 dBs to plus 10 dBs. These ones have actually been limited to only give 1/4 volume control of the top end, so literally only around about 5 or 6 dBs difference. You can't take the sound down to 0 on this machine, and that makes the control level that are there now a lot more sensitive than the large recording control level found on the other machines. Another thing about this machine is it runs at 15 and 30 inches a second. This is quite normal. However, the tapes that were recorded in the early 60s were 7.5 and 3 3/4 inches a second. After speaking with one of the engineers, he pointed out that a lot of these tapes were done at twice the speed, and in some cases 4 times the speed. This is to increase the speed of production, although sound quality supposedly will fall by running them at that kind of speed. So what really do I think I've got here? Well, I do believe that this machine would have been used in the master dub system of the EMI Hays tape duplication department. I believe that this machine has been finished off a little bit better than its other machines, because the head block cover is in place. There's no extra wires hanging out. We've got a replay head, and basically the machine is in a situation where it could be used in a studio, very much like the BTR2. But this machine would have never been used in Abbey Road or any other recording studio like it. So I don't 100% know the full origin of this recorder. I do believe it would have been used in the chain of making EMI's tapes for sale. I believe that it'd probably be the master dub machine because of the feature of having record and replay, where all the rest of the chain really you wouldn't need that functionality. However, the pictures that I've seen of that machine don't look as well finished off as this. For example, you wouldn't be able to put the head cover on there because there's not enough space because of all the wiring looms and everything. The chances are that this has been tidied up by possibly an engineer or engineers instructed to make a viable model or possible upgrade option to potential customers who have the BTR2s to have their machines converted to BTR3s. The wiring looms and electronics and such can be relatively easily upgraded. It would take a finite amount of time for an engineer to actually do the modifications, but they're not impossible. So if anybody has any information on these machines, I would be very interested to hear from you. Maybe you worked at EMI Hays, maybe you were involved in the tape recorder development section, maybe you worked at Abbey Road Studios and possibly may have even seen this machine trolleyed in for test purposes. If anybody's got any information on this machine, I would love to hear about it.